So we continue with part 2 of Kamma in Second Noble Truth. Second Noble Truth and Kamma. So this part 2 will be a little bit more deep and hard to understand. I'm gonna just explain it anyway, and if you find yourself confused and you don't understand, just skip this part totally. It's okay. And also, if you happen to have certain insights by looking at the slides or listening to what I say, and maybe you find that I may not be entirely accurate, leave a comment there on the YouTube page as well. So, many people think of karma as reward and punishment. Like, if I do something to someone bad, then I'm going to receive bad karma. Okay, but actually, it is not. It is but an impersonal law of nature. Yeah, it is not personal at all. Okay, so let's look at this sutta from Samyutta Nikaya 12.17. So I have heard at one time the Buddha was staying near Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrels' feeding ground. Then the Buddha rode up in the morning, taking his bow and rope, entered Rajagaha for alms. The naked ascetic Kassapa saw the Buddha coming off in the distance. He went up to the Buddha and exchanged greetings with him. So there were naked ascetics in the Buddha's time. So remember, there were different schools of thoughts, right, regarding the body and mind. Many schools think that once you give up craving for the body, then you will experience nirvana. So, or liberation or moksha, they call it moksha. So, of course, the Buddha was also doing the same thing, but he actually taught that body and mind are not separate. Okay, whereas those ascetics he was speaking to, they were trying to separate the mind from the body. So, well, Master Gautama asked Kassapa, is suffering made by oneself? So the Buddha said, no, Kassapa, suffering cannot be made by oneself. So in the previous sessions, we learned that the self is made of 5 aggregates, which is condition, and the name and the form we give it, we are actually identifying with an idea. This idea is impermanent because this idea is formed by conditions, the 5 aggregates, okay? And also, if it is made by an unchanging self, if karma is made by an unchanging self, then suffering experienced now is one's fault and retribution since beginningless time lah. Correct? Imagine if you are a permanent soul, never changing, that means then you have committed karma for like eons and eons, right? You can't even count. You can't even tell when is the beginning of a self. So then how can you ever end karma in this way, right? If karma is created by a permanent self, how can karma be changed or let go of, right? It makes no sense at all. So the Buddha said no. Then he asked, then is suffering made by another? Is suffering made by another? So the Buddha said no, because if suffering is made by another person, then it means that all you need to do is to get rid of the other person, right? Then your suffering will cease. Okay, so the Buddha said no. Then he asked, is suffering made by both oneself and another? Okay, so suffering, again, I'm just saying suffering is related to karma, right? So he said, well, no, suffering is not made by oneself or another, because if this is the case, then one solid self and the other solid self will be forever locked in suffering. Not so, Kassapa, said the Buddha. Then how does suffering arise? Does it arise by chance, not by oneself or another? So that means he's saying that life is by chance, whatever happens by chance. The Buddha said, no, of course not. Because over here, the questioner is denying cause and effect, having run out of options. So then Kassapa was frustrated. He asked, then is there no suffering at all? No such thing as suffering. So the Buddha said, no, suffering is real. Then Kassapa said, the master Gautama doesn't know nor see suffering. Then the Buddha said, it's not that I don't know or see suffering. I do know suffering and I do see suffering. Like I said, the Buddha experienced pain. Pain is a cause of, is a feeling, right? And then there's craving to not want to feel pain. So the Buddha has given up that craving to not want to feel pain. So he's at ease, right? Because he doesn't identify with the six sense base anymore, namely to do with the body sense bases, right? So then Kassapa asked, Master Gautama, when I asked this question, you say not so, yet you say there is such a thing as suffering. And you say you do not know suffering, and you do see suffering. No, and you say you do know suffering and you do see suffering. Sir, explain suffering to me. Teach me about suffering. Suppose that the person who does the deed experiences the result. The deed does the deed. That means somebody who commits a karma and experience the result. Then for the one who has existed since beginning, suffering is made by oneself. And we know in reality it's not true totally, because you can be doing kind things and people criticize you and you feel terrible about it, you feel angry. That is suffering. So how can you say that suffering is only made by oneself? Right? So then this statement leans towards eternalism. It's as if this soul that exists all the while, beginningless time, permanent, unchanging, right, is fixed and has a fixed anger, feeling like anger whenever something happens. So it makes no sense, because we know in reality things change. We can observe for ourselves, so this doesn't make sense. Suppose that one person does the deed, which is karma, and another experiences the result. Then for one stricken by the feeling, that means somebody makes me angry or sad, right? I'm stricken by the feeling of sadness. Then suffering is made by another. So this statement leans towards annihilism. It's like, then all I need to do is get rid of everyone that causes suffering, right? I just need to annihilate them, okay, as I mentioned above. So it makes no sense too, because if we reflect, somehow we also cause ourselves the suffering, right? So avoiding these two extremes, the Buddha teaches by the middle way. Ignorance is a condition for karma, choices. So over here, the translator, I think I use Bhante Sujato's Sutta Central. He used the word choices, because karma is a choice. When you make an intention, you have to make a choice, and when you stand by that choice and you have a sense of self, then you're going to experience the result of that choice, right? Okay, so karma is a choice we make with our actions of body, speech and mind. So choices are a condition for consciousness, a sense of I. So because there's a sense of I, we always feel like we need to make a choice. But actually it is possible to make a choice without a sense of self, and the result of not having a sense of self is actually compassion towards all being and yourself. Then the choice you make will always be compassionate, and in that compassionate peace there is really no karma there. Okay, like I shared many slides before, the San Francisco prayer, remember? Peace is like the middle way of love and hatred. Love and hatred is a choice. If you make a choice as a self, then you're going to experience either love or hatred. But if you let go of the self, you see everyone as experiencing the same as you, the eight worldly winds, the suffering as you do, then the choice you make will be compassionate, and compassion is a middle way, then that doesn't really have much karma lah. I mean, I have to, but if you make a choice out of compassion and things don't work out and you feel responsible, then you have a sense of self in that compassion. So that is how this entire mass of suffering originate, when ignorance fades away and ceases with nothing left over. Okay, choices cease. See, so you don't have to make a hard choice when there's no sense of self, because the choices you make will always be beneficial for everyone, including yourself. When choices cease, consciousness ceases. So it's not like you become dumb and you don't sense your body anymore. Consciousness ceases means that there is no identification with this sense consciousness. That sense consciousness, every time it touches this, what in Mahayana Buddhist, actually in the early Buddhist tradition, in the Pali canon, there's also the word emptiness, sunyata. So anytime there's a contact with sense base, it touches this emptiness, it dissolves, it ceases. So this is a stage of cessation. You will learn later in meditation where a person, or not person, okay lah, use a person because I don't know what any other word. So the Buddha is like that. So therefore, every sense contact with object, it ceases into sunyata, and all he has is compassion, which is his driving force to teach and to help liberate others. So there's no more karma. Okay, that's the middle way. So that is how this entire mess of suffering ceases. Okay, so if one clings to sense of self, then there will be an action taken by a self and results to be experienced by a self, which then causes suffering. Okay, so even good karma can cause suffering. As I mentioned earlier, you do good, you're not appreciated. Because that sense of self creates that good karma, there will also be suffering. So karma and the energy of karma and not having a self there to generate it is very hard to understand. So this is from Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. I took it from his book, Kamma. The question of karma and not self is confusing and difficult to understand for various reasons. A monk once asked the Buddha, how does karma done by someone, by a not self, right, give results for self? This question arose because of the teaching of not self that points out that the actor who identifies with the sense base and comes out with a personality is an actor, right, is merely a mind-body process void of self. Okay, so whatever the mind body acts is lack of self. There's actually no self there, but because of the feeling of craving, clinging, right, that creates a self. Okay, so after an action, karma, is done by a selfless mind body, how could it have any results for a self who is the doer, who intentionally acted? The new concept of not self contradicts the old concept of self. There is a self-consciousness that claims to be not self and does things in the name of not self. This is very chim, very difficult to understand. So what I think he's trying to say is, you see, you haven't really penetrated the truth in your heart and your mind about if the five aggregates are not self, it also means that there is something else there for you to find out, which is an absolute truth, and this thing is not a self, but it is very open, it is very spacious, there is actually no one there, but there's the energy that moves the body and mind. So this becomes very confusing, right? So somebody who haven't experienced this through meditation, who doesn't understand it, denies a self with perception and thought, which is part of the five aggregate. And by denying that self, there is that very hard feeling of denial that, again, that is the five aggregate. Feeling of denial is second aggregate. Perceiving that there is no self there and thinking, no lah, there's no self there, further reinforce the second aggregate, which is the feeling of denial that there's a self. So therefore, if there is a denial or suppression, which is also a feeling, there is a self to receive the result. You understand? So this is not about merely saying, I deny this self, I suppress this self, I don't believe there's a self here because the Buddha said so. But actually deep down, you do still have the belief. So therefore you will receive the results. Okay? Because there is a feeling of denial or suppression. Hence this monk's question. If we see it rightly, we will understand that when the body-mind is not self, the results of its actions will happen to a selfless body and mind. Meaning, if there truly is no solid self here, and you have realized that when this body and mind have pain, You know, when you suffer depression, there's pain in the body. When you suffer painful body, there's pain in the mind. Then when you truly realize that there is really no one there, and you realize absolute truth, you realize the middle way, that pain is no different from pleasure. Pain is also born of pleasure. Then you're able to let go of that. Then despite the pain, there is no self to receive that pain. Okay? Despite there being pain. Understand? So this is very difficult to understand. But anyway. So if karma is not self, its results will be not self. Okay? So from the explanation I gave earlier, the pain body, this is a pain body we have. You will experience pain. And if pain is not self, you truly realize that it is just part of the mind-body process. It will pass. And that pain is no different from pleasure again, then there is actually no self to receive anything because you have touched the middle way. Okay, so what occurs is in accordance with karma. So remember, we have this body because there is that past karma, right? That this body is receiving pain. Okay, but there's no self to create this. It's just the craving, the clinging. Okay, so we're actually actors on a stage called Earth. We're actors with a personality that is conditioned by the 5 aggregates that cannot hold, cannot stand for a substantial identity. So we're merely actors, and all of us have a time on stage. And the problem here is we are taking our stage roles too seriously. We begin to identify with it, not realizing that we have to get off the stage. Okay? So self-consciousness, as long as you feel self-conscious, as long as, even if you deny this self, but there's a feeling of denial or suppression, then you will receive the fruits of karma and you will have reaction to it. If there is no more identification with consciousness of body and mind, and the heart is very open, open like an hotel like a building, like a spacious hotel. Anything can come in, go out. You don't cling to any guests or hotel visitors that come, like, hey, you cannot go, right? You don't cling. Anything can come in, come out. Anything can exist. You're just so open. Then there is no more self-consciousness. Doesn't mean that you faint and you have no more consciousness, but because you no longer cling to that, okay, then there is no suffering or clinging onto the effects of karma, okay? Because then you allow this karmic energy to flow through, eliminating its effects, just like the Buddha. Pain comes, pain goes, okay? Right, something like that. So karma can be changed. So if you are a unchanging entity, then karma can never be changed. And if you are just a material entity that gets annihilated, then why would there be karma? It makes no, you see? So yeah. Anyway, one time the Buddha was staying near Nalanda, and then a disciple of the Jains, another religious group I mentioned before, they're similar to the Buddhists, but they're a lot more extreme. Went to the Buddha, sat down to one side, and the Buddha said to him, "Chief, how does the Jain ascetic of the Natika clan teach his disciples?" Natika is Gautama's clan is Sakyan, so the Jain's clan is Natika. The teacher's clan is Natika. Okay. Natika Nataputra, I think, if I remember correctly. That's the teacher of the Jains. So he said, "Sir, this is how the Jain Natika teaches his disciples. Everyone who kills a living creature, steals, commits sexual misconduct, or lies, goes to a place of loss, to hell. You're led on by what you usually live by. This is how the Jain Natika teaches his disciples." So the Buddha said, oh, okay, you're led on by what you usually live by. If this were true, then, according to what the Jain Natika says, no one would actually go to hell, to a place of loss. What do you think, Chief? Take a person who kills living creatures. If we compare periods of the day and night, which is more frequent, the occasions when they're killing or when they're not killing? So the student of the Jain Natika said, well, the period where they're not killing, their killing is the period when they're killing are less often, while the occasions where they're not killing are more frequent. Then the Buddha said, oh, since you said you're led on by what you usually live by, if this were true, then according to the Jain ascetic of Natika clan, no one would actually go to hell, right? Since the frequency of you killing is less than the frequency of you not killing. Eh? So therefore, right, the Buddha said, if a teacher has this view, anyone who kills or lies will go to hell, then the disciple who believes the teacher and tells a lie and believes he will go to hell, and if he dies in that moment, he will definitely go to hell. Okay, so the Buddha said, this is not good lah. You have to let go of that view. Okay, otherwise you will really go to hell because you believe your teacher. But the disciple of the Buddha is different. Okay, even though the Buddha criticized and denounced killing living creatures, saying stop killing, right? But the disciples, when he tells the disciples who have killed living creatures to a certain extent, and the disciple thinks, because he understands the Buddha's teaching, that's not right, that's not good. I feel remorseful for what I've done, but I can't undo what I've done. Reflecting like this, disciples of the Buddha give up killing living creatures, and in future they don't kill living creatures. That's how to give up this bad deed and get past it. Okay, so you must have remorse, you must want to change. Therefore karma can be changed, right? So there are three roots of unskillful that causes unskillful karma. So Shariputta in Middle Length Discourse said, what is the root of the unskillful? It's actually greed, hate and delusion. This is called the root of unskillful. Anything unskillful comes from greed, hate and delusion. Greed, hate and delusion. Okay, what is greed? Greed is wanting second noble truth. Yeah, wanting pleasant feelings or staying status quo. That's delusion. Okay, so hatred is not one thing, also second noble truth, right? Which includes fear, jealousy, anger. Because why am I angry? Because I don't want this situation. When this situation ceases, I won't be angry. So you see, second noble truth. What is delusion? It's ignorance. It's also second noble truth. Not understanding greed and hatred, which is a chain of cause and effect, right? And due to the and that greed and hatred arise with identification of the mind body, so then there is ignorance, because we are not seeing life and reality through the Four Noble Truth. This causes delusion. Okay, so these are the three things. What's the difference between them? Greed, the Buddha said, is mildly blameworthy and slow to fade away. So I mentioned before, if you are you generally have good life, you get what you want, good family and all that, and and your greed is not too much, not too little, just nice, then you can go on like that for a long time. You wouldn't really seek the spiritual path. Hate is blameworthy. Hate is quick to fade away, because hate causes harm to others, therefore it's blameworthy and it's quick to fade away, like our anger is quick to fade away. Delusion is very blameworthy and slow to fade away. Why? Because delusion is the support, okay, of greed and hatred. As long as we are delusional about what the self is, greed and hatred will continue. Therefore it's the most blameworthy, and because not everybody asks this question, it is the slowest to fade away. Okay, so So the Buddha says when greed arises, you have to look at the cause, okay, and reason why it arises. So he said, what's the cause? Beautiful feature of things, just like you are having a very comfortable life. Then what's the cause, reason for hate to arise? He said the feature of harshness, anything that is awful, right, makes you feel not good, right? Then when you apply the mind irrationally to the feature of harshness, hate arises, okay? So same for greed. So what's the reason why delusion arises? And when it arises, it increases and grows? Then the Buddha said it's the irrational application of your mind. When you apply the mind irrationally, delusion arises. And once it arises, it grows. Okay, anything that is not viewed in the lens of Four Noble Truths is an irrational mind. Okay, so this is the cause, this is the reason why delusion arises. And once a reason, it increases and grows. So this is the last slide for today, the session now. So the second noble truth in brief. Second noble truth in brief is actually just craving that comes from feelings, that comes from the wrong view of self. Okay, so feeling that comes from contact of the sense space gives birth to craving, because we crave for feelings, stimulation, right, to feel alive. Okay, so due to ignorance in identifying with the sense space as a self, feeling arise and thus craving, which is the second noble truth. So that's all. Thank you.